Hello everyone, investment scams rampant. Please vigilant and discerning. Do not trust information from unknown sources. Please make sure recognize two official Capital Securities community, Facebook, Capital Securities, YouTube, Capital Wealth Insights.
Hello everyone, welcome to Qingyi Good Night. Today is Thursday, January 8th. I'm analyst Zhang Jida. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share for us. If you have any investment questions, feel free to leave me a comment. If I don't have time to answer today, I'll reply to everyone in class tomorrow. This week is wrapping up quickly, so don't forget that tonight we have the initial jobless claims numbers coming out. And of course, tomorrow, the most important employment data, the US unemployment rate and non-farm payrolls. Another key point is that the US Supreme Court will rule tomorrow, January 9th, on whether Trump's tariffs are actually legal or not, whether they're valid or not. We've talked about this before, and just yesterday we discussed whether or not it's feasible and what our views are on the matter. If we have enough time today, we'll also briefly talk about some related changes, since the verdict could come as soon as tomorrow. As for the exact time of the announcement, whether it'll be in the morning, at noon, or in the evening, we still don't know yet, but at least everyone should be mentally prepared. All right, let's have some fun. Hello, everyone. I see Hui Huanzhen online. Good evening. And hello to Mei Daizi, Yulinga, and who else? Oh, Huoshen. Is Huoshen a new friend? Huoshen 2051, hello. And Feila Yuan, as well as Jeff Lian. Good evening. Zheng Liping, hello. Liping, it's been a while, hasn't it? All right, Alice Fu and Caesar and Kei Coco Lee. Good evening, good evening. Hello to the staff as well. And I love Jolin. Good evening, good evening. Okay, let's first take a look at today's investment highlights. First up, in order to save the election, there have been some wild moves, but Trump. So Trump, this November, the election kicks off. As mentioned, before the election, he'll roll out many policies, substantive, strategic, or economic measures to improve livelihoods. A basket of policies will emerge, one after another. Of course, when it comes to the economy or the overall outlook, his policies are definitely more favorable. So what exactly did he propose today? What highlights are there for people's livelihoods in the economy? Today, I want to add something else for everyone. Of course, it's about poor Venezuela. Venezuela is really a situation you don't want to see happen in other countries. It's actually a big problem. So why is Venezuela so pitiful? Because in reality, it's like a cow that's been skinned twice. How exactly did this cow get skinned? And why do we say it's pitiful? Later, when we talk about geopolitical risks, I'll share more related topics with everyone. Of course, this also includes recent news from Denmark, specifically updates about Greenland, as there are now some new developments. As for the industry side of things, is Amazon's success boosting its subsidiaries, and can Nvidia make it in southern China? Amazon's investment holding company is very well known. It's called Anthropic. Of course, it's a hugely important golden goose, second only to OpenAI's ChatGPT, and then there's Anthropic. Another famous AI platform is Gemini, which is under Google. So that's the situation. The three major AI platforms currently running in parallel are OpenAI, then Gemini, and Anthropic. Why do we say Anthropic is a huge golden goose for Amazon? Because it might also go public with an IPO this year. So a bit later, I'll also share some related information about its potential IPO. Additionally, to answer why it might be difficult for China to give the green light, well, we know that Nvidia has always wanted to export its H200 chips to China, whether it's the H100, H200, or other related chips. However, this has been blocked by the US government. A while back, we know that at the end of last year, the US government did relax the rules. They've now loosened up and said that Nvidia can export the H200 chips to China, but the condition is that 20% of the sales revenue must be paid as a sort of protection fee. So that 20% is basically an expense that has to be paid to the US government. Now, what about this situation? Of course, Nvidia just accepted it. They're also quite happy to export to China. But now it seems like China might not actually be so willing to buy Nvidia's H200. Why is that? Tonight's show will break it all down for everyone. All right, everyone, and also Melissa, good evening, good evening. Of course, the most important thing tonight is that around 9:30, there will be some fun data released. This is the high-frequency data from the US that's published every week. This week, it's the initial and continuing jobless claims numbers. The previous value was 199,000, the expected is 210,000, and the continuing claims were 1.866 million. Those are the previous numbers. The expectation is for a slight increase to 1.9 million. So what about this data? As we always say, the initial claims number that's released each week usually falls somewhere between 200,000 and 230,000. So if the data released at 9:30 later comes in lower than the expected 210,000, then the market might interpret it as, well, what does it mean if it's lower than 210,000? It means that fewer people are applying for unemployment benefits. And if fewer people are applying, then of course the market will think that the Fed doesn't need to rush to cut interest rates to save the job market. So if the upcoming data is higher than 210,000, or even higher than the previous 200,000, then people might see things differently. They might feel that the job market is relatively weaker, and maybe the Fed will cut rates at the end of January. So it's really as these economic data come out, whether it's employment or other related data, they become a major factor that can increase or decrease the market's expectations about whether the Fed will cut rates or keep them unchanged in January. So at 9:30, we'll track this data together. In addition, at 11 p.m., there's the monthly wholesale sales rate. This data is relatively neutral. The previous value was negative 0.2, and as for the expected value, I haven't seen it yet. But regardless of what the forecast is, we'll just take a quick look at this data at 11 p.m., since its impact on the market is relatively neutral. Of course, the more important data will be at 9:30 tonight. And then, as I just mentioned, tomorrow night's unemployment rate and non-farm payroll data will be much more important. Yeah, a lot of things in this world feel like survival of the fittest. When the time comes, whoever has the bigger fist gets to call the shots. That's right, no doubt about it. In a bit, I'll talk to you all about that really unfortunate situation in Venezuela. All right, also about Trump, why did I start off by telling everyone that before the election, Trump would propose a lot of plans to save the economy and improve people's livelihoods? It's to save his declining poll numbers. And as for the Republican Party, maybe with the election in November looking a bit tighter, you can see Trump's recent moves. From the fourth quarter of last year up until now, he's been extremely proactive. What does that include? For example, at the end of last year, what did he start doing? First, regarding the trade war with China, he decided to postpone it for another year, to discuss it again later. Basically, they agreed not to make any changes for now, and to keep the current tariffs as they are, and revisit the issue a year later. This is the biggest change for China. The second thing is, if you remember clearly, at the end of last year, there was talk about imposing tariffs on things like lumber, soft furniture, and some kitchenware. Originally, tariffs were going to be imposed on all of these, but what happened? They were all put on hold, all paused. With this pause, you can imagine what that means. A lot of daily necessities, a lot of the trade war issues. Basically, before the midterm elections even started, Trump would usually hold off on taking action. He would wait until after the elections, see whether the House or the Senate had the majority, and then start negotiating slowly. So you have to remember this overall approach. Right now, Trump is maintaining a certain tone. Basically, before the election, he tries to save people's livelihoods as much as possible to boost the polls. What does that include? For example, February 24th is part of this. By February 24th, we'll have already finished the Spring Festival. By February 20th, the holiday should be over. At that time, Trump said he was expected to deliver the State of the Union address in the House of Representatives on February 24th. Of course, the content will likely focus on things like the national economy, foreign affairs, national defense, and probably also include issues like the trade war and so on. For national defense, issues like Venezuela, Colombia, Denmark, Greenland, Iran, Cuba, Russia, and China will be addressed. Regarding the economy, he will present related points in the State of the Union. The main focus for the economy is saving it and making America great again. Especially this year, there's the so-called Great America Act, which is a tax cut plan. So this year, with the tax cut plan, plus the Federal Reserve possibly lowering interest rates, the combination of rate cuts and tax cuts should in principle be positive for the US stock market or even the international stock market in 2026. It should still be a relatively bullish market, but it's not like it will just keep going up and up without stopping, or that it will rise from the beginning of the year all the way to the end. No, that won't happen. There will definitely be ups and downs, big and small, throughout the year. If I have time, I'll talk more about this with everyone. Because next year is the year of the horse, and the way the market moves in the year of the horse is different from the year of the snake. The year of the snake is winding and twisting with big ups and downs, like a snake, lots of highs and lows. The year of the horse, basically the year of the horse is up and down, but in principle, the year of the horse is about moving upward, because you know, success comes with the horse, and rise to nobility with the horse. So basically, the year of the horse is all about galloping forward and moving upward. The overall trend is still up, but as everyone knows about horses, if you've ever ridden a horse, did you ever ride a horse when you were a kid? For me, when I was little, I went to places like Youth Park in Taipei. Maybe in the south there are similar places, and even in Taichung, isn't there a place called Holy Horse Ranch, right? That place also has a horse ranch. If you go horseback riding there, or if you rode horses as a kid, you know that when you sit on a horse's back, it's all up and down. As the horse walks or runs, it's bumpy, really bumpy, and it feels like you're bouncing along as it moves. But even though the horse is moving forward and running, you have to be able to handle the bumps along the way. It's just constant bumping, bumping, bumping. And the more it goes, the higher the bumps get. Each wave is higher than the last, and the ride just keeps getting bumpier. This kind of bumpy ride can be hard for a lot of people to handle because it's always up and down. One moment you're up, the next you're down. Up and down, up and down. Maybe the fluctuations aren't as big as they were last December. Last year, from April all the way through, it just kept dropping, dropping, dropping. And then in April, it hit a new high. Big ups and downs were last December, but what about this year, the year of the horse? Maybe the way it moves will be more bumpy, just bump after bump after bump. As long as you can stand firm and hold on tight, you can still reap the rewards of the rise. But I think next year, Caesar, you should pay a little more attention to one thing. What should you pay attention to next year? Watch out for what's called the turnback kick of the year of the horse. Horses are big animals, right? You should never stand behind a horse. Sometimes when we go to an equestrian center or something like that, or when you visit a horse farm, the horse riding coach always tells you and has told everyone not to stand behind a horse. Why? Because if a horse kicks with its hind legs, it can be fatal. So what you need to watch out for next year is that kick from the horse's hind legs. We don't know exactly when it will kick, but when it does, the impact will be huge. So what exactly is this kick from the horse's hind legs? Where might the sudden move land? It could happen around this year's midterm elections in November, because that's when we'll face the so-called political uncertainty surrounding Trump. At that time, things will be in an uproar. Whether it's the Republicans or Democrats, some will propose new policies, others might talk about impeachment, and there will be all kinds of unpredictable changes. So everyone should pay attention this October and November, and even into November. After the elections, when we get to December, will there be some related uncertainties? No matter how things change, whether the Republicans or Democrats end up holding the majority in the House and Senate, this variable will have a huge impact on the entire political and economic landscape. So what I think we really need to pay attention to is actually this period toward the end of the year. In the second half, around October or November, the horse's kickback or kick from behind in the year of the horse, I think its impact will be quite strong, so everyone should pay more attention. I believe the real auction will be in the second half. As for different forecasts or judgments, we'll just have to wait and see. At the beginning of the year, I just wanted to mention that in the year of the horse, I think this year's volatility and fluctuations will be quite significant. But this year's volatility won't be as scary. We can flatter the horse, kiss up to people, but you must flatter the right person. Some supervisors dislike flattery, while others enjoy it. Know who to flatter. Flatter the wrong person, and you might get kicked by that horse's hind leg, ending up out of the picture. Trump's State of the Union address. Still, it's worth paying attention to the State of the Union address on February 24th. The last time he gave one was in March of last year. Back then, right after he took office, he delivered his State of the Union address, which lasted 100 minutes. What did he talk about? He talked about maintaining the tariff war, and also things like cracking down on immigration, opposing transgender rights, opposing diversity, and so on. Of course, he also touched on some economic issues, with tariffs taking up the biggest portion. So what exactly will he propose this year? We'll just have to wait and see. But it's reasonable to expect that what he brings up this year will be more focused on concrete policy measures, things like tax cuts, tariffs, or how he's going to lower oil prices, whether that's through dealings with Venezuela, Denmark, or other countries. So how will it go? The negotiations might be a bit like a so-called policy address or a performance report at the beginning of the year. As for whether the public will be satisfied after he makes his announcement, and whether his approval ratings or the Republican Party's numbers will go up, I think that's something we'll still have to watch and see. For more than 10 years anyway, this whole year, all the policies are centered around how to save the election. Just remember that. Whether it's monetary policy, fiscal policy, or national policy, they're all developed to help save the election. Also, in order to save the election, there's one more thing he needs to do. What he's doing with this, I guess Taiwan probably can't do it this way either. Taiwan probably can't do it like this. Can't really learn from him. So what exactly is he doing? All right, about that, good evening, everyone. I can only say that maybe there will be a sudden reversal in January. There might be one in January. The reason for that reversal in January is because it has risen too high, grown too much. So what about that January reversal? Well, generally speaking, if we look at past history, in January, the market tends to go up. During the first quarter of every year, Q1, the probability of increase is high, over 50 to 60%. So January through Q1, Taiwan, US, or international markets generally lean toward an upward trend. This upward trend is mainly to encourage you to take profits on your long positions as much as possible and lock in your gains. This kind of situation tends to happen. Also, do not forget that next week on January 15th, TSMC will be holding its earnings conference, and related financial reports and such will probably be released around then. All the possible positive news you can think of is already expected. So when they actually announce the financial report, the stock price might go up in the short term, but remember, when it rises, it could also drive up the Taiwan stock market and the US markets, like the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. Just remember what you should do. Take some profits when prices are high, and if the price drops, look for another buying opportunity or take a safer approach. So for January or Q1, this pullback I think is more of a normal correction after a big rally, since the market has already gone up a lot. That kind of pullback is different from the sharp drop we talked about earlier, the one that might happen at the end of this year in October or November. That kind of sharp drop is something we might not be able to predict. Okay, that sharp drop might be more intense, but the pullback from January to the first quarter this year, I think that was more of a normal, healthy correction. So just manage it a bit, control your position sizes. As for Trump, as we just mentioned, what kind of policies is he offering? He said, to address housing affordability, he said that a lot of people come to the US to work hard, chasing the American dream. But when they get here, they realize, wow, housing prices are just too high. They can't afford to buy, and maybe they can't even afford to rent. So he said that in the future, there might be a ban on certain major investment institutions. Institutional investors won't be allowed to buy entire single-family homes. He said these houses are meant for people to live in, not for companies to speculate on or to be held by corporations. He said that by 2025, these major institutional investors, those large-scale, important investors, will account for about 30% of the purchases of entire single-family homes. And especially, the biggest player is Blackstone Group. Blackstone Group is the largest private equity apartment owner in the United States, owning 230,000 apartment units. That's an enormous amount. Their house buying method is different. They're not like, oh, today I'll buy one apartment in Xinyi district, where a single unit might cost 100 or 200 million, buying 1 or 2 units, or 5 or 6 units in Banqiao or Sanchong, spending a few hundred million. No, they don't do that. They buy entire buildings. What is it to buy an entire building? For example, in a community like this, they buy the entire commercial building, the whole thing. That whole commercial building might cost around 3 billion or even 6 billion US dollars, and they just buy up the entire building, the whole thing, all at once. Then they might rent it out to the public, to businesses, or to corporations. Because they have so much capital, these equity investment firms and investment institutions have a ton of money. When they buy real estate, they're not buying just 1 or 2 units, they're buying the entire building. They buy up entire communities, even whole hillsides. So of course the prices end up being controlled by them. So as the media says, in the future, in order to make housing more affordable for the public, there might be a ban on institutional investors buying entire buildings. I think this is something. The main motivation here is really to please the voters. But honestly, even if these institutional investors stop buying entire buildings, does that really mean regular people will be able to afford them? Not necessarily, right? Maybe for a while they won't buy, or let's say in Taiwan, for example. If in Taiwan, Cathay Group stops buying land and houses, and Fubon Group also stops buying land, houses, and building properties, if these biggest landowners stop building and developing houses, does that really mean regular people will be able to afford them? Not necessarily, because whether housing prices go up or down. There are actually a lot of economic factors that affect this. Maybe Trump, in order to curb these high housing prices, might introduce something like a vacant home tax, a tax on hoarding houses to bring prices down. That way, more people might be able to afford to rent, or maybe even buy a home. Whether it would actually work, I don't know. What I do know is that in Taiwan, it's probably not feasible. If Taiwan really tried to implement something like a vacant home tax to bring down real estate prices, I think it would be much, much harder than in the US. After all, when we talk about real estate, it's a leading industry, a locomotive industry. That includes things like raw materials, steel, and cement, as well as labor, construction companies, and banks. Loans, financing for construction and land development, and even political interests are all involved. So when it comes to real estate, it actually connects to too many industries, too many people's jobs, and too many people's interests. So honestly speaking, for government officials to really be able to bring housing prices down completely, I think the chances are very low. Honestly, it's not easy at all. Of course, maybe some countries can do it, but in places like Taiwan or the US, I think it will probably take some time. But we can only say that when Trump does this kind of thing, to some extent, it's just to please voters and try to boost his poll numbers. That's about it. So just take it as something to watch. Whether it can really be implemented, whether these big investment institutions like Blackstone will actually stop buying up entire buildings or even release some of them, that's another story. As for whether these properties will really end up being owned by other people, well, I think we still need to wait and see. Need to keep observing. So regarding this policy, the reason I'm bringing it up to everyone, besides supplementing the information about the related policies, is mainly to let everyone know that before the election, Trump will come out with a lot of things like this. There will be a lot of talk, a lot of so-called measures to save the economy, help people's livelihoods, and boost his poll numbers. There will really be a lot of these, and this is just one of them. For example, like I just mentioned, at the end of last year, sometimes things only happen when the pressure is on. Things like tariffs on furniture and kitchenware, and then this year, maybe they'll say, I want to bring down real estate prices so more people can afford to buy a home, that kind of thing. So before the end of the year, there will be a lot of this kind of news coming out. As for the US, the Federal Reserve is keeping the rate at 4.16, and the terminal rate hasn't changed either, staying around 3.04. The number of rate cuts is about 2 to 2.5 times, so there haven't been any major changes there either. At the end of January this year, when the Federal Reserve makes decisions about raising or lowering interest rates, we'll observe and update everyone then. For now, it looks like the whole year we'll still see about 2 rate cuts, and that hasn't changed. Jeffrey said if you can't afford it, you just can't afford it. That's true. So it's tough for everyone. Houses are just like that. That's just how it is. If you cannot afford it, you just cannot afford it. Sometimes, honestly, even if the price drops, you still cannot afford it. Okay, Kevin, is it Kevin Share or KCAV? Kevin, good evening. And Tony 61757, good evening as well. I also saw news saying that people thought Trump was paving the way for his own group again. If you say they're paving the way for his group, I think that's true to some extent. Yeah, there is some truth to that. When is Trump going to hand out money? Who is this? Is this Yori or Yorin? Okay, when is he going to hand out money? I don't know when he's going to do that. And then he just keeps talking and talking. I don't know if the thing you're talking about, handing out money, is the same as that tariff thing. Didn't Trump impose tariffs on customers last year? He imposed tariffs on customers. And didn't he say that because the government collected a lot of money, he decided to give the tariff profits back to the people? Then I don't know how much each person was supposed to get. I've already forgotten. Like in Taiwan, they gave out 10,000 NT dollars, right? Everyone probably went to get their 10,000 NT dollars. In the US, I don't know how much they gave out. $2,000 or $5,000? He said it was about 2,000 US dollars to be given to every American because they collected a lot of money. But up to now, it kind of feels like all we've heard are promises, like footsteps on the stairs, but no one actually coming down. Probably just like that. So how the decision is made is really important. Whether or not they give out the money depends on tomorrow. Whether or not they distribute the money depends on what the Supreme Court decides tomorrow. If the Supreme Court announces their decision and tells everyone, if they tell everyone that Trump's tariffs are illegal, okay, let's put it simply. If someone says it's 1,000, I don't know if it's 1,000 or 2,000, but if tomorrow they tell you and the final result is that Trump's tariffs are illegal, well, if they're illegal, then they can't be imposed, right? If they can't be imposed, then if you say they can't be imposed, does that mean everyone will start celebrating and the whole stock market will skyrocket? Maybe in the short term, some small and mid-cap stocks will go up because they might not be subject to the tariffs, so their costs will go down. Some smaller new stocks that were worried before might. Big cap stocks aren't worried. Why? Because big companies like those 7 giants have already increased their investments in the US by hundreds of billions. $100 billion, $500 billion, $600 billion, like Apple, Meta, and so on. Haven't all of them ramped up their capital expenditures a lot? Some even say they're going to give Trump or the Trump administration a lot in tax revenue and spending. There's been a lot of talk about that, right? As long as you invest in the US, as long as you buy American products, as long as you create more jobs in America, then Trump won't tax you. So which companies are actually able to do this? It's these big tech stocks, the big 7 giants. So in reality, whether they're taxed or not doesn't really matter because they've already announced they're investing so much. Basically, that's how it is. SMBs are more worried because they can't compete with large firms. When they can't compete with big companies, if Trump imposes taxes, costs rise 20 or 30%. This cuts into profit margins. SMBs already have thin margins, often only 20 or 30%, already low. If taxes and costs rise, margins could drop significantly. If the tariffs are declared illegal, then these small and medium-sized companies, these SMEs, will have a chance to rise, will have a chance to go up, because their cost pressures will be lower, right? But let's look at it another way. What else could happen? Trump has previously said that he might use things like Section 232, 301, or 112, using other methods to impose new taxes. The second point is that he might just impose new tariffs again. So everyone shouldn't get carried away or be overly optimistic thinking, wow, if these tariffs are ruled illegal, then everything will skyrocket. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, it could be a situation where all the good news is already priced in, so you actually need to be careful. The second issue is, if these tariffs are ruled illegal, then let me ask you this. Last year, from April and May onward, they kept imposing more and more tariffs, competing with the whole world and with businesses, adding up to hundreds of billions, right? Hundreds of billions of US dollars in tariffs. Weren't that many tariffs imposed? So are these direct tariffs supposed to be refunded to the companies? Should the money be returned to the country? Is that even possible? Everyone can think about it. Can it be gotten back? We think the chances are low, really low, because it's a long, time-consuming process. How much should be returned, what percentage, and how is that calculated? Wouldn't that overwhelm the Treasury and Commerce Department? So the money collected probably isn't going anywhere. Maybe it just won't be returned. For money already in pocket, asking the US to give it back is almost impossible, so they likely won't make it retroactive. You can't go after what's already happened. Maybe from 2026, you can't collect it. But for anything collected before 2026, they're not returning it. If they give it back, it gets really weird and complicated. If returned, it could mess up US fiscal support. The deficit goes up. If the deficit increases, the US might even head toward recession. The US economy and stock market could experience significant turbulence. If tomorrow it's ruled illegal, I think, or rather, we think, first of all, this money probably won't be returned, okay? Because giving it back would cause a huge shock. Secondly, not taxing it doesn't necessarily mean everything is completely fine, because there will be other provisions to handle it. So will something happen tomorrow? If the ruling comes out and says, all of Trump's tariffs are completely legal, all of them are legal, I think that's also very unlikely. Okay, if everything were legal, then it wouldn't have dragged on for so long. If everything were legal, there wouldn't be a need to keep appealing to the Supreme Court and the appellate courts for so long. So if you say everything is legal, I don't think that's going to happen either. So in the end, it might turn out that some are maybe legal, and some are maybe, perhaps Trump had the authority to enforce them. Some might not be legal, so I think it's probably about half and half. Which ones are legal and which ones aren't, we'll know once the ruling comes out tomorrow. So I think the market movement tomorrow will be relatively volatile before the news is announced. Everyone should buckle up and be a bit more cautious. Whether it's legal or not, I think the volatility will increase. The swings will get bigger. So don't be overly optimistic, but of course there's no need to be overly pessimistic either, because there are elections this year after all. If they can tax it, and with the election this year, Trump, as always, Trump will also take action. So if it's legal and taxed, Trump will take action. If it's not legal and still taxed, the money won't be returned to you. And then he might just find another way to keep taxing. So whatever needs to be done, Trump will probably keep pushing forward with it. That's how it is. Just to add a bit more about tariffs and some other simple points for everyone. Of course, as for the final decision, we'll just have to wait until tomorrow. If there's an announcement tomorrow, we'll take a look then. All right, the US dollar index remains weak, so we won't detail that today. Now, regarding geopolitical risks and poor Venezuela, I want to re-examine that. Some say it must be legal, right? They even arrest presidents from other countries and nothing happens. Well, I really don't know what to say about this because it's true. A head of state just gets taken away like that. Of course, some countries don't recognize him as the legitimate president of Venezuela, since there are some issues. So some European countries, for example, don't acknowledge him. He mentioned Venezuela, saying it's like a cow that's been skinned twice. He's really quite pitiful, this poor guy, really pitiful. He said that Trump claimed the US would sell oil on behalf of Venezuela. When did Venezuelan oil become America's? I don't get it either. The US will supposedly sell oil on Venezuela's behalf, and then Venezuela will transfer about 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the US. The market value of this is about $2 billion. So after handing over these 30 to 50 million barrels of crude oil to the US to sell, once the US sells your crude oil and gets the money, right? After getting the money, Trump says that he will be the one to oversee the funds. This is really strange. He's acting as both the referee and the player. He wants to oversee it himself. And why does he want to oversee it? Because he says he wants to make sure that the $2 billion earned from this sale is actually used for the welfare of the people of both the US and Venezuela. But did he mention any specific proportions? No, he didn't. So if you get $2 billion, but then he tells you that Venezuela only gets $20 million and the remaining $1.98 billion is for the American people, what can you do? There's nothing you can do about it, right? So when he says he's making sure the funds are used to benefit every American and Venezuelan, technically that's not wrong. But as for the proportions, he doesn't dare to say. Also, Venezuela will be supplying crude oil to the US indefinitely, real crude oil. The White House will actually reduce sanctions, and he says that in the future, when Venezuela sells its oil and makes money, In addition to unlimited supply to the US, meaning the US gets a lot of oil, the US produces oil itself, but its production is insufficient. Supply can't meet demand, and US demand is huge. Now they've secured a golden opportunity with Venezuela. If Venezuela's oil production increases, if equipment gets running, and if heavy oil refining facilities perform well, if they get all the equipment up and running and the amount of refined crude oil for export increases, he says this oil supply will be indefinite and has to go to the US. So what about the extra oil? If you sell it, can't you make money from the oil? What about the income from selling oil? But you can't keep the oil revenue for yourself. You can only use it to buy American-made products. Wow, that's really like not just having 2 layers of skin peeled off a cow, but 3 layers, completely stripped. You know what that feels like? Let me give you an example. Yeah, it's like, let's say one day, there's a perpetual motion machine for crude oil, right? So you buy from me, and after you buy, the money you get has to be spent on America. That's what it feels like. It's like if one day the US were to take over Taiwan, if one day they invaded Taiwan, and then what? TSMC is the most profitable cash cow, right? So they announced that from now on, all advanced chips produced by TSMC, whether 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, or any nanometer, will all have to... The output of these chips, the condensed chips and high voltage lines, all have to go to the United States. That's the first thing. Second, they're given to the US. So the US gets them, right? The US buys them, and the money from those purchases goes to TSMC, right? That money goes to Taiwan, doesn't it? But the money the US pays ends up with TSMC, right? Then TSMC takes that money and has to use it to buy American products again. Okay, so as long as TSMC produces chips, all of them are sold to the United States, and the money TSMC earns also goes to the US. That's basically the idea. You see, this is exactly the situation Venezuela's in right now. All the money they make from crude oil has to be used to buy American products, and all the oil they produce has to go to the US. It's basically being bullied and made to sit on the sidelines. So how long will this situation last? I don't think it'll be resolved soon, because their president has already been taken away. Now you might ask, why aren't other countries saying anything? Why aren't other countries speaking up? The reason is simple. Their fists aren't as big as others. When your fists are smaller than others, how can you speak up? You can't just boldly step out. Look, is there any country right now that dares to stand up and say, give Maduro back to Venezuela or ban American companies from doing business in Venezuelan oil fields? Not a single country is speaking out. The UK, France, Germany, none of these countries are stepping up to say anything. China isn't saying anything either. At most, they'll say, we want to maintain our existing contracts with Venezuela, and we can't let the US do whatever it wants. That's about it. No one dares to come out and say that Maduro should go back. And no one dares to say anything about what Trump or the US is doing either. So there's really nothing that can be done about this because the situation is just too overwhelming. All we can say is that Venezuela is really quite pitiful. Whether it's their crude oil or their money, everything has to be handed over to the US. That's pretty much how things have turned out. Oh, right, because they call Maduro the head of a drug cartel. Yeah, it's basically whoever has the bigger fist gets to call the shots. Okay, and then there's another issue, which is about Rubio. This is another colonial problem. So what's the deal with Rubio in this whole thing? He said that next week they're planning to discuss the issue of Greenland with Denmark. And what did he say? If the president thinks there's a threat to international or national security, then yes, that's true. He believes that Trump has the right to use military means to address national security issues. However, since Rubio is the Secretary of State, basically like the foreign minister, they tend to prefer handling things through diplomatic channels. And then they also want to counter things like China and Russia's aggression and threats to the US and the Arctic region. Oh, as everyone knows, Greenland is right next to Canada, way up north, close to the Arctic, near the North Pole. It's right by the shipping routes in the Arctic Ocean. So that area, Greenland, we talked a bit about it yesterday, it's actually the largest island in the world. That island is almost always in a very cold state, being so close to the Arctic Ocean. Now, if Russia or China were to launch missiles, especially those hypersonic missiles, flying over the Arctic, Greenland would be the first outpost to detect them. That's why the US has always wanted to claim Greenland for itself. Besides its strategic position, as I just mentioned, Greenland is also rich in rare earth elements and minerals. So what about this aspect? In fact, the US already has a military base on Greenland. Now, do they need to take over Greenland by military force? Actually, there's no need at all. Absolutely none. Why? Because in fact, the US and Denmark already signed agreements back in 1951 and again in 2023. After World War II, During the Cold War period, Denmark and the United States had already signed an agreement that basically allowed the US military almost unlimited access, no restrictions at all. Whatever equipment they wanted to install, whatever kind of defensive weapons or military bases they wanted to set up, they could do it. Anything was allowed. They just opened it up, let the US do whatever they wanted, set things up however they liked. This was the agreement Denmark had already worked out with the US back then. So in reality, Trump didn't need to use any military means to get involved. He just needed to give Denmark a heads up, let the people of Greenland know, and say, I'm going to start now. Build more military bases, start setting up some missile defense systems. Actually, that's all it takes. That's really all it takes. So does the US really need to buy Greenland outright? Not at all. Because according to the agreement and the contract, the US was already allowed, without any restrictions, to do all these things. So how do you handle this simply? You know, the US doesn't need to buy it. They just need to do two things. There are two ways. First, just keep going. Right now, the US only has one military base in Greenland, right? Just add a few more military bases, add 5 or even 10. Can you add more airfields and missile systems? Sure, you can fill it up as much as you want. As long as Denmark is okay with it and Greenland doesn't have any major objections, then there's no need to buy it. It still remains an independent territory, a self-governing region. You just let it stay independent, it's still an autonomous region, and you don't have to interfere in their foreign affairs or defense. Right, but you can set up and deploy these missile systems or air defense systems, can't you? You can use them to guard against missile threats from China, Russia, and so on. Another thing is, if you don't want to buy it, you can just lease it. You can lease Greenland, lease it for 50 years, 100 years, even 200 years. As long as the people on the island are willing, you pay them and they agree to it. It's mutually beneficial. The US military would also help protect your land, and then you give each of the local residents, over 50,000 people, say $100,000 each, or whatever amount, it doesn't matter. You lease it from them, and if the residents can accept it, you all think it's acceptable too. So honestly, there's really no need to use force. Whether you lease it or just build a few more military bases, you can settle this issue. And then, so regarding this thing with Denmark and Linden, next week the parliament is going to discuss it. As for what exactly will be discussed, we'll have to wait and see. I don't think it'll be too difficult to handle. It's not like the US would really need to send troops to take it by force or anything like that. No, as the saying goes, do you really need to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut? Would you really use a butcher's knife to kill a chicken? If you did, would Denmark really go to war with you over it? That would be pretty strange, right? After all, they're both NATO members, both allies. So it's really difficult, you know? So later on, I'll show you how the parliament is actually going to negotiate with Denmark. There are different ways to do things. Pigs have their way, buyers have their way, and there are ways to establish bases. Anyway, I think there are plenty of ways to handle this situation. Now, moving on, since we've just reached 9:30, let's take a little break here. Let's talk a bit about the data we just mentioned. Before we get into the data, let's take a look at this Zelensky situation. This message, just take a look at it. There's actually not much difference from a couple of days ago. Zelensky said that in the first half of 2026, there's a possibility that the Russia-Ukraine conflict could end. As for whether it will really end, I don't know, because people have been saying it could end for 3.5 years now, almost 4 years. So we'll just keep waiting, What Zelensky said, he said the same thing last year and the year before that too. Always saying it's going to end, we need a ceasefire. He's been talking about a ceasefire for over a year and it still hasn't happened. I really don't know what's going on. Anyway, the whole thing just keeps dragging on, so let it drag on. As for crude oil prices, they're still leaning bearish. Today there was a slight increase of 0.21, but the overall bearish structure hasn't changed. Now let's move on to the economic data. Let's take a look at the US weekly jobless claims that were just released at 9:30. Some people say that the world's troublemakers see the US as the world's boss. In the past, the US used to call itself the world's police, right? Its national defense was strong, its military was strong. As the world's police, it seemed like they wanted to meddle everywhere. After Trump took office, it became even more blatant. He'd go around enforcing things, and if any country didn't get along with him, he'd want to take them down. If a country didn't buy American products, he'd quickly start a trade war. So there were trade wars and there were real wars too. Basically, they stirred up a lot of things. He basically belongs to a kind of, well, in the past we used to talk about, wasn't there a President Monroe back in the 1800s? He was the 5th president of the United States, if I remember correctly. There was a President Monroe, and he introduced something called the Monroe Doctrine, Mon as in door, and Roe as in row, so Monroe. President Monroe's Monroe Doctrine was basically saying that European countries shouldn't come and colonize us. European countries don't come and colonize the Americas. And as for the countries in the Americas, well, we should all unite. Central America, South America, all of the Americas should unite together. As for your European affairs, I won't interfere in your business either, but you shouldn't step into our American territories. If you do, then we'll become hostile toward you. It's kind of like, to put it simply, you mind your own business, I mind mine, and we each do our own thing. We each sweep the snow in front of our own doors, but we don't interfere with each other. That's called the Monroe Doctrine. But when it comes to Trump, it's become the Trump Doctrine, which takes it even further. Basically, he's like, I'm the world's boss, and whatever it is, I want to make America great. If you don't get along with me, I'll go after you. It's basically turned into the Donald Trump Doctrine. So now the market is talking about this as a focal point, this doctrine, and how it's playing out. So this kind of thinking, I believe, will keep popping up as long as Trump remains in power over the next few years. Now, looking back at the US, the number of people filing for initial unemployment benefits has reached 208,000, which is actually lower than expected. That's similar to the previous figure of 199,000, so it's staying between 200,000 and 230,000. The number of people filing is slightly lower than expected, about 2,000 fewer. I don't think that's a big deal, and honestly, the impact isn't significant. Can you really say the market will take off just because of this? Not really. So if you say the job market will change because of this, or there's a structural shift, that's not happening either. There aren't more layoffs and it's not collapsing. Today's data basically shows it's staying around 210,000, which is pretty close to expectations. Now, for people continuing to claim unemployment benefits, the previous figure was 1.866 million, and the forecast was 1.9 million. The number just released has slightly increased to 1.914 million. This means the total number of people continuing to claim unemployment benefits has gone up a little, but we can only say that the job market is cooling off just a bit. Maybe this could help the Fed consider cutting interest rates, but honestly, I don't think this data will have much of an impact either way. I think the biggest impact will still come from tomorrow's non-farm payrolls and unemployment rate, so those will be more important. Those numbers will have a bigger effect on the US stock market. Also, tomorrow, the Supreme Court will rule on whether Trump's tariffs are legal or not, and that decision could cause some market volatility as well. I think the impacts will be bigger, but as for the just released 930 jobless claims number, in my opinion, it looks pretty neutral. I don't think it will have much effect on the stock market, not much at all. It's just lukewarm, which means the job market is lukewarm, and that's enough, just enough. Back then, Japan also wanted to create the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Every country, when pursuing imperialism or dominance, starts thinking about invading other places. They believe their own country is the best, like Japan in World War II. As for whether the future will turn into a Greater America's Co-Prosperity Sphere or some kind of Great Dragon Fist, I really don't know. Let's just wait and see. Let's keep watching, haha. Okay, so who's this? Edison. Edison May is asking, excuse me, teacher, about the so-called taking profits at the peak and then buying back in when it drops. How does that apply to stocks that keep hitting new highs? New highs, stock after stock hitting new highs. It's kind of like a tongue twister, right? For example, like gold or TSMC, it's the same thing, the same situation. Because when it comes to stocks, that's why I always say, every time you encounter an index or a stock that keeps hitting new highs, that means it's a bull market structure or a bullish trend. There's no doubt about it. Let me say it again. As long as a stock or an index has the chance to hit new highs, that means it's a bullish stock or a bullish market. And that's beyond question. But you have to remember, every time a stock or index price hits a new high, it often immediately faces what's called profit-taking pressure. That's why I always tell everyone, whenever you see a breakout or a surge to new highs, don't rush in to chase it. Because after hitting a new high, there's often what's called a let the bullets fly effect. Of course, when it breaks out, you can go with the trend and take some partial profits first. Then, after the bullets fly for a bit, what happens? There'll usually be a pullback after a strong rally. When it pulls back to the moving average, you can gradually buy back the portion you originally sold, maybe half or a third of your position. But your original shares that you bought at a low price, you don't have to sell them. Let me give you an example. Whether it's gold or TSMC, let's use TSMC as an example. If you bought TSMC at 400, 500, or 600, do you really need to sell? Honestly, at that point, it doesn't really matter whether you sell or not. If you don't sell today and TSMC drops from 1700 to 1000, you're still making money, right? Even if TSMC gets cut in half from 1700 to 850, you're still in profit. So whether you sell or not doesn't matter. You've become a long-term investor. For that chunk of stocks you've held long-term, you don't have to sell any. But for short-term positions where you added more, it's a different story. When it goes up for a while, you sell a portion, and when it drops, you buy some back. To put it simply, if your cost for TSMC is 500 or 600, or even below 1000, let's just say if your cost is under 1000, and TSMC makes up about 50% of your holdings, then that 50% of TSMC you don't have to sell. Treat it as a long-term investment. Don't sell it, only when you really need cash. For the other 50%, keep it as flexible cash. How can you invest? Use it for short-term trading or for short, medium, and long-term planning. Treat it as a short to medium-term strategy. When price goes up, sell a bit. When it drops, buy more, repeating this process. By doing this, you'll notice, for example, with TSMC, the price might gradually rise from 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, up to 1,700, and maybe even reach 2,000. We just don't know. That way, you'll gradually build up your position over time. You'll keep accumulating your position, adding more and more. Your long-term low-cost positions might start from 500, 600, 700, 800, or 900, and they'll keep increasing little by little. So you need to turn your short-term positions into long-term holdings. But with short-term positions, since we don't know if the price will keep rising or if it might suddenly drop and end the trend, that's why I say every time it hits a new high, you can sell a portion first, and then when it comes down, buy some of it back. So every time you reduce or increase your position, you should do it in batches, about 1/3 at a time, gradually taking profits and gradually adding to your position. Don't go all in at once. This kind of approach is actually quite common among institutional investors as well. We buy in batches, not all at once, which gives your investment cost and flexibility a lot more room. So this is my response to Edison's related question. Good question. Because we never really know when the highest point is, and we also never know when the lowest point is. So buying and selling in batches becomes relatively more important. All right, now let's take a look at the industry side of things. Wow, as I'm talking, it's already 41 minutes in. Let's pick up the pace. So the information says that the Chinese government this week asked some Chinese companies to possibly pause orders for H200 chips. Actually, this has already been going on for a while, since last year. China itself wants to develop its own domestic chips, whether it's Baidu, Alibaba, or others, Huawei's chips. They all want to develop their own AI chips. So even if you say the H200 chips can really be exported to China, China might not fully buy in. They might not completely go for it. So we can only say that if China is willing to buy, then of course it would be a plus for NVIDIA's stock price and revenue. But in the long run, I do not think China will always keep buying NVIDIA's lower-end chips, because China will want to develop its own products. As their technology improves, they might not necessarily buy H100 or H-series chips. So just keep this news in mind, since it hasn't been fully confirmed yet. After all, everyone wants to develop their own domestic chips. As for NVIDIA's stock price, it is still the same old saying. As long as that blue neckline has not been broken, there's no need to worry too much. What really matters for NVIDIA is whether it can hold above the monthly moving average this month. If it can stay steady and strong there, that is what will be good for its future. If it holds, there's still a chance for another upward push. Yesterday, it went up about 1%. So today, we'll just keep an eye on whether it can firmly hold above the monthly moving average. If it does, then just treat this news as neutral for now. That's enough. So that's a quick update on NVIDIA. Now, there's another company called Amazon's Kuiper, which is kind of like a golden goose, or maybe more like the child bringing honor to the parent. Anyway, it's a profitable company, and it's planning to raise $10 billion on a $350 billion valuation. This matter actually dates back to about 4 months ago, around last September. Back then, the valuation was $183 billion, and now it's almost doubled. In fact, this year there are several companies looking to go public with IPOs. Not just Anthropic, but also OpenAI. Originally, OpenAI's valuation was $500 billion, but I've heard they're planning to raise it even higher. $75 billion is a huge amount. And there's another one. Elon Musk's SpaceX is also preparing for an IPO. I've heard its current valuation is as high as $800 billion, which is really impressive. So for these companies planning IPOs, if they do manage to go public successfully, it will definitely be a plus for their original investors in the US. For example, I remember Amazon had already invested $8 billion back then. And back then, Google invested nearly $2 billion. And I've also heard that NVIDIA is looking to invest more than $10 billion as well. Oh, so looking at the whole picture, before this IPO, the so-called fundraising of $10 billion, so far it seems that some of it has indeed been successfully raised. Also, the company has received investments like the $15 billion from Microsoft and NVIDIA. This kind of investment is basically like a perpetual motion machine. They invest, and then they ask Anthropic to buy something. They buy $30 billion worth of computing power from Microsoft, and this computing power is built on NVIDIA's AI systems. So to put it plainly, Microsoft and NVIDIA are basically saying, if I invest in you, you have to buy Microsoft's computing power, and that computing power runs on NVIDIA's chips. So that's how it works. It's kind of like going in circles, just like the partnership between Oracle, OpenAI, and NVIDIA. It's basically the same concept. So this is the perpetual motion machine of AI, and so far nothing has changed. It's all about moving forward based on this model. Keep moving forward. If it really does go public smoothly, then everyone should pay a bit of attention. Both Amazon and Google have invested in it. As for Amazon's recent stock price, it's been following this upward trend line and hasn't broken below it. Yesterday, it went up slightly by 0.26%. It's holding above monthly and seasonal moving averages. There's this blue ultra short-term trend line. For the ultra short term, just watch this blue trend line. As long as it hasn't been broken, there's nothing to worry about. So that's a quick update on Amazon because Anthropic is a very important cash cow for them. They invested in it a long time ago, already put in $8 billion US. All right, so what about the other one? The other one is also competing with NVIDIA, and that's Google. Today, Morgan Stanley once again raised its shipment expectations for Google's TPU chips. Really great news. As you all know, NVIDIA is currently the world's largest company by market cap. It's close to $5 trillion. So who's second now? Not Apple, Google. Google has surpassed Apple to become the company with the second largest market cap because their TPUs are selling well, performing well, and shipments are booming. They're used in and everything related to Google, like their Gemini and other developments, have all received pretty good reviews. Plus, I heard that Meta is looking to buy $10 billion worth of Google's TPU chips. So what exactly are these TPUs, GPUs, or LPUs? Well, this table here, everyone can keep it for reference, since we're short on time today and won't go into too much detail. This table basically shows that the area currently weaker is inference. For inference, they spent $20 billion US to acquire the related technology to make up for the shortcomings in inference. As for Google's TPU chips, they're pretty good at both training and inference, but their downside is that they're relatively closed off and mainly for Google's own use. Now, this LPU from Grok is extremely strong, specifically in inference. That's why NVIDIA took over the market. It's to make up for NVIDIA's relative weakness in inference technology. So comparing the two, at the moment, I think NVIDIA still has a slight edge. Looking at the current chips, NVIDIA is definitely leading in AI development, but Google is a rising star and catching up very quickly. So if we look at Google's stock price, yesterday it went up 2.43%. After some consolidation and volatility, it still has a good chance to hit new highs. There's a strong possibility it will reach new highs. Of course, it can't really be compared to NVIDIA's #1 market cap. There's still a long way to go, but for now, it looks like Google can definitely hold on to its position as the company with the second highest market cap, and that should continue for the foreseeable future because looking at the stock price, if we look at Google's current price, it's actually holding up more steadily above the monthly moving average compared to others. So just to add a bit more info about Google's stock in its current position, after consolidating, it still has a chance to hit a new high. All right, now moving on to this news about Trump and the defense contractors. This is just something to take note of, nothing more. So regarding these defense-related stocks, didn't they take a big hit yesterday? Trump said, you companies keep issuing dividends and doing stock buybacks, but you're not really increasing your capital expenditures, not building more factories, and not rushing to fulfill the orders the Department of Defense wants. If this continues, I'll ban you from issuing dividends in the future. That's why stocks like these dropped yesterday. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Huntington Ingalls and so on, all these companies took a big hit, right? But I think this is just a short-term factor. With Trump's Monroe Doctrine approach fueling things, his layout and deployment in the defense industry, and even the increase in defense orders, I think in the next few years, it should only keep increasing, not decreasing, so you can just treat this as a short-term shock. Basically, today in the US stock market pre-market, these companies are bouncing back again. They're going back up. For example, in the pre-market, companies like Northrop Grumman are up 7.6%, and Lockheed Martin is also up 7%. And then companies like Raytheon Technologies and General Dynamics are also up 4% to 5% in pre-market trading. Also, just now I mentioned HII. Let me pause. This company builds aircraft carriers for aerospace. It's up 3% pre-market. Constellation Brands and Plenty are both up 2%. After yesterday's big drop, these defense stocks bounced back. They dropped 5% yesterday, but today they're up 7%, making up for the loss. All right, so among the stocks that are up today, there's also Boeing. Boeing just received an order from Alaska Airlines for more than 110 planes, which is actually the largest order in the company's history. So Alaska Airlines placed an order for up to 110 planes, which is a real boost for Boeing. As a result, Boeing is also up 1.64% in pre-market trading. As for the companies that are down, there's Newmont, AbbVie, Moderna, and companies like Corning, among others. In pre-market trading, they're down about 1 to 2%. Overall, I think the companies that are up today are mostly defense-related stocks. Defense stocks pulled back yesterday, but are bouncing back again. Plus, with the geopolitical risks we mentioned, like how Trump always seems to want to attack someone or acquire someone, of course the demand for defense is driven by that kind of fear. The Dow Jones Index still holds a bullish trend. Like yesterday, after hitting a new high, it stabilized. You'll notice it tends to pull back a bit after new highs, but the overall bullish structure hasn't changed. The Dow Jones is a very important index. It's basically Trump's administration's performance indicator. What about the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index? This ascending wedge is converging, so pay close attention to whether it can hold steady and stay above its rising resistance line. Breaking above that line is really important. If it can't and pulls back, then watch the support level, roughly around the quarterly moving average. For the semiconductor index, mainly I companies like Micron Technology. Can these memory companies hold up, and is TSMC still enough to support that region? Lately, it's been a bit sluggish and soft. Basically, after a big run-up, it's now consolidating around the quarterly moving average. Yesterday, it edged up by 0.24%. So overall, I think the bullish structure of the US stock market hasn't changed. It's just that there are some challenges ahead, like the January jobs report coming out tomorrow, the ongoing tariff war and whether it will be ruled legal or not, and then on January 15th, TSMC will be holding its earnings call to announce related information. As for the January market trend, in fact, there's a good chance it will continue into the first quarter, and most of the time the market tends to go up. But don't forget, whenever there's a chance for a rally or to hit new highs, it's best to take some profits first. Then, if the market pulls back to the moving average, you can buy back at a lower price. We still think this is the safer approach at this stage. The overall framework hasn't changed. The only difference is how many positions you hold and which direction you adjust your strategy. That's all for the group-related content we're sharing before the US stock market opens. If you found this helpful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Wishing everyone smooth trading, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Our company has no improper financial interests in the individual securities recommended or analyzed. The information in this program is for reference only. Investors should make independent judgments, evaluate carefully, and bear their own investment risks. If you don't want to miss the latest market updates, be sure to turn on the notification bell and hit subscribe. In addition, we have plenty of great video content on both Facebook and YouTube. Don't miss out. In our group, we share in-depth explanations of global financial events with you every day.